The safety of women is a topic that is discussed more frequently than any other in a wide variety of circles. Every day, voices are raised in all parts of the world to protest the slow progress in this area and the specter of impunity that constantly accompanies it. You only have to recall one such trial to see how reluctant investigators and judges are to address the issue. In most countries, there are laws that protect women and guarantee their right to live without violence. There are protocols intended to ensure that gender-specific complaints are handled more rigorously and effectively. Nevertheless, there is still a long way to go. That is why it is so important to show people examples of the fight for women's rights and their defense. Linda Loaiza Lopez Soto was born on December 12, 1982, in the city of Loaiza in the state of Mérida, Venezuela. She grew up in a typical Venezuelan Andean family consisting of her father, Manzan Lopez Mesa, originally from Colombia, and her mother, Paulina Soto Charlestra, also of Colombian descent, as well as 10 siblings. When Linda was young, she spent a lot of time outdoors and helped her parents in the family livestock business, which sparked her particular interest in animals. Linda enrolled in an agricultural vocational school. On February 27, 2001, she traveled to the country's capital, then moved to Caracas to become a veterinarian. No one could have imagined that Linda's fate would turn out so differently. Neither she nor her relatives could have foreseen how events would unfold. Just a few weeks after her move to the capital, Linda became the protagonist of one of the most horrific crimes in the country. On the morning of March 2, 2001, she was kidnapped by Luis Antonio Carrera Almoina. When people speak of Luis, they inevitably mention his affiliation with the most prominent representatives of Venezuela's intellectual and political elite. Luis was the second son of Gustavo Luis Carrera Damos, a renowned researcher, writer, and university professor, a member of the Venezuelan Language Academy, and the rector of the Open National University. His uncle, Harmon Carrera Damos, was an important intellectual, academic, and well-known Venezuelan historian. The family also included a member of the Communist Party of Venezuela, Pedro Imolcacara Damos, as well as Filippo Carrera Damos, a psychiatrist and sexologist who was known and respected for his research on sexual behavior in the Venezuelan population. Furthermore, Filippo Carrera Damos founded the Venezuelan Society of Sexologists. Pilar Armana de Coder, Luis's mother, who died in 2000, was also a well-known researcher, writer, and professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the Central University of Venezuela. Luis's aunt, Laura Albin, Pilar's older sister, was close to the Chavista government and participated in establishing cultural ties to socialism. Luis was known in high circles as an agronomist, a livestock breeder, and the son of a university rector. In reality, however, he had neither a recognized stable position nor a permanent address. He lived mostly on the money and influence his father provided. Father and son were very close. It was as if Luis lived in his father's shadow. He also spoke to him every day. As a child, Luis attended a private high school in a privileged neighborhood in eastern Caracas and spent some time in France. His outgoing personality and his ability to present himself were traits people who knew him often mentioned. Luis was 36 years old when, on March 27, he abducted 18-year-old Linda at gunpoint. On the morning of March 28, Ana Cecilia Lopez Soto realized that her sister had not come home. The girls had lived together. Young people who move to the capital typically do so with a clear goal in mind: university study. When Anna found out Linda hadn't returned, she went to the police, but they told her it was too early to search. Soon afterward, she received a call from an unknown man telling her that his sister would not be coming back. When she tried to call him back, only an answering machine picked up. In the meantime, it became clear that the kidnapper was Luis, because he was the one who had made the call. Anna went to the police at least 6 times, but her reports were never acted on. The officers reassured her, saying that Linda and Luis were probably in love and it wasn't worth meddling in their relationship. From time to time, Luis called Anna and told her that his sister was fine, that she was now studying and working as a model. Finally, 2 months after the kidnapping, on May 26, 2001, the authorities took Anna's report and began investigating the crime, which included a death threat. Police tried to contact the owner of the phone number and left several messages asking him to report voluntarily to the authorities. On that March morning, a few weeks after her arrival in Caracas, Linda left the building on Avenida Pantheon where she was staying with Natalie. She had her dissertation and some documents with her to submit to the Ministry of Education. The building was on a cul-de-sac that also housed a small bookstore, a bakery, and a hardware store. Just steps from the entrance, a man approached her from behind with a gun, dragged her toward a wine-colored pickup truck, and, in a violent struggle, pushed Linda against the driver's side and threw her to the ground. He threatened to kill her and drove off after forcing her into the vehicle. Then he headed down the street to a nearby hotel where the kidnapping occurred. In the first few minutes following the incident, Linda was confused and terrified. She cried and begged to be released. But what could she do? He was twice her size, physically stronger, and though he appeared personable, he acted aggressively and was armed, threatening her at all times. He told her he would kill her if she resisted. Luis took Linda to a hotel called Aventura. Before parking, he warned her again he would kill her if she tried to scream, then put the gun back in his jacket pocket. There was a ramp in front of the hotel where cars could drive up to the lobby entrance. Luis stopped there. Before getting out, he spoke to Linda in a threatening, aggressive tone, telling her not to cry, not to scream, and to act normal or he would kill her. The room he had booked was not yet ready, and they were asked to wait about an hour before checking in. Staying in the hotel was very risky, so he forced Linda to leave the lobby, got her back in the vehicle, and drove to the Daraba residence in Los Palos Grandes, where his father's apartment was located. Before they left, Luis threatened Linda again, this time putting his arm around her shoulder as they walked from the parking lot to the elevator. There they ran into 2 acquaintances, and Luis stopped to greet them. He told the women Linda was his girlfriend and that she was crying only because she was overly emotional. He claimed Linda had decided to move in with him and was simply sad about leaving her family behind. Once they reached the apartment, Luis calmed down somewhat and started packing various items into a black bag he had prepared. In addition to videotapes, a leather belt and some clothing were thrown into the bag. By the time he was done packing, enough time had passed for the hotel room to be ready. Linda did not manage to escape. Luis loaded her down with hangers and bags. Even when her hands were full, he held her by the shoulders the entire way from the door to the parking lot. When they reached the hotel and entered their room, Luis quickly inspected the doors, windows, curtains, and bathroom. Meanwhile, Linda noticed a door leading to the neighboring room. She hoped to escape through it, but Luis guessed her intention and asked the receptionist to change the room. This time the hotel staff did not take long. Luis and Linda were immediately escorted to room 303. That was where the screaming, insults, and beatings began. He threatened to kill Linda and her entire family if she disobeyed him. This marked the start of a months-long nightmare. Luis planned his actions in advance, like a director of a horror movie. He explained to his victim exactly what she had to do and say. Everything in the room was arranged. The security chain was properly attached to the door, the locks were firmly shut, the TV volume was turned up high to drown out her screams, the curtains were tightly closed, and the gun was within easy reach so that the perpetrator could threaten the victim whenever she showed any sign of resistance. Linda described her first night of captivity as terrible, but perhaps that does not adequately capture the horror, shock, and despair. The night was undeniably brutal and nauseating. The beatings continued with increasing intensity, accompanied by humiliation, severe psychological, verbal, and physical abuse for 112 days. That's almost 4 months. In the beginning, it all took place in that hotel, then in an apartment east of Caracas in Los Palos Grandes. On July 19, 2001, Luis left the apartment and forgot to lock Linda in handcuffs. Summoning all her remaining strength, she managed to get to the window and call for help. Some time later, firefighters arrived at the building, had to climb onto the apartment balcony, and eventually got inside. They were met with a horrifying sight: soiled sheets, chaos, filth, abandoned items, and Linda. Ana still remembers seeing her sister in the hospital. Even though rescuing her sister was a relief, the memory of that first meeting is still painful. On the day Linda was freed, 5 hours passed between the arrival of the authorities and Linda being handed over to medical personnel. Her family was devastated. Linda's condition was so critical that she could have died at any moment. During her captivity, her life was constantly in danger. After the rescue, she needed 15 complicated surgeries, 2 of which involved her pancreas, operations that are dangerous for anyone, but especially for a young woman. Linda spent more than a year in the hospital. Photos of her swollen face, her eyes sealed shut, burns on her nose, and her disfigured mouth filled the front pages of newspapers that were outraged by this crime. Luis's atrocities earned him the nickname, the Monster of Los Palos Grandes. But Linda's real battle was only just beginning, because, having survived the worst time of her life, she now had to face the greatest shock of all: impunity. In an interview, Linda revealed that, despite the many scars on her body, her main wound continues to bleed, twisted, horrible, and not only hers but that of all women who have been abused by men who remain at large. Linda was certainly not the first nor last of Luis's victims. After her escape, his life remained unchanged. The authorities took no punitive measures against him. Linda decided she would seek justice. She decided to study law and earned a law degree and a master's in human rights. Linda argued that the socioeconomic status of the Monster of Los Palos Grandes heavily influenced the investigation and court ruling. She had to go on a 13-day hunger strike just to get the trial to happen. Then followed 6 weeks of court proceedings marked by insults, abuse of status, and disregard for witness statements. In Venezuela's domestic criminal proceedings, there were 2 oral hearings because the first one was cancelled. In the second hearing, the assailant was found guilty of unlawful detention and aggravated assault. However, he was not charged with rape. The review of the rape case is still incomplete. Early on, Luis made clear to her his advantageous socio-economic status. He mentioned his father's position as rector while holding her captive. He repeated daily that his father's status and reputation, along with numerous connections, would keep him free. Linda's case was overshadowed from the start by misrepresentations and the criminalization of the victim and her relatives. For instance, basic procedures, searching the crime scene, taking photos, collecting physical evidence, conducting a forensic medical exam, were not carried out immediately but only after 8 days. These elements of the investigation, which should have been performed at the outset, were omitted, including the full examination of the victim's eyes and other missing details. All of this, of course, worked against Linda and benefited the perpetrator. It turned out Luis had an accomplice, his own father, who received the rent payment for the hotel room in Los Palos Grandes where Linda was kept until her captivity ended. In one of the proceedings, Luis was examined to see if he had any psychological or emotional disorders that would explain his behavior. The evaluation found no evidence of a mental illness, but it did indicate antisocial personality traits, limited empathy, and low frustration tolerance. In October 2004, Judge Rosa Cadiz dismissed all charges against Luis. In her statement, she initially claimed Linda had come home beaten but had not filed a report because she did not want to involve third parties. In another phase of the proceedings, the defense argued Linda was a naive woman who had consented to most of the defendant's acts. In the new hearing, the defendant was convicted of serious bodily harm and deprivation of liberty. The charges of rape and attempted murder were not resolved. Linda had no choice but to turn to an international court. As a result, her case was examined by more than 90 judges and a dozen prosecutors, yet justice was still not served. In 2007, Linda turned to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which then summoned her for lengthy hearings about 3 times in the following years. In 2015, she was summoned again, and the president of the commission, Jose de Jesus Orozco Hen, gave Linda the floor to testify. In just a few minutes, she described the horrors she experienced at Luis's hands and how she managed to call out to people near the building. She also described the moment of her rescue and summed up her years-long struggle for justice by saying, "Each time he put his fist to my lips, he told me that it was my father's hand striking me." Linda became an advocate for women's right to a life free from violence. When you are the victim of a crime, you should be protected by the justice system. That is what she fights for. Liliana Ortega Mendoza, head of an organization that defends and promotes human rights, pointed out that women in Venezuela are re-victimized in 2 ways. First, by sexual violence itself, and then by a justice system that makes it difficult for them to seek redress. Francisco Quintana, another representative acting on Linda's behalf, submitted statements and motions in the name of his client, as the state responded that the written proceedings were complete and that there were no more points to be added. There was no ruling on the individual issues that should have been discussed. Francisco Quintana asked the commission to make a decision on the matter and to evaluate the investigation's flaws, the failure to meet inter-American standards regarding the situation of sexual assault survivors, and the abuse his client suffered. In its background report, the Commission recommended that Venezuela investigate Linda's case as a victim of sexual abuse effectively and with due diligence within a reasonable time, so that the corresponding investigations and proceedings might be conducted in accordance with standards set by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. In addition, it recommended that the state take appropriate administrative, disciplinary, and criminal measures against public officials whose actions or omissions contributed to a denial of justice. It was also suggested that the state provide victims in need with free and immediate medical, psychological, or psychiatric care. Finally, it was recommended that Venezuela develop mechanisms to prevent a repeat of such events, including legislative, administrative, and other measures to ensure access to justice for female victims of violence, and to implement a national policy for preventing violence against women, including effective oversight and monitoring mechanisms. In 2018, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled against the Venezuelan state for various human rights violations against Linda and her family. The court classified the crime against Linda as sexual slavery and attempted commission of an offense by a state-backed individual. It found that the authorities' inaction stemmed from the inadequate and negligent response of state officials who, upon learning of the incident, did not take the necessary and expected measures or handle the crime with due diligence. Their actions also alerted the aggressor. The Venezuelan state has not complied with the court's ruling. Linda continued to fight for the enforcement of measures protecting women, girls, and adolescents. She said she would keep fighting until the state fulfills her demands. Linda was held captive for 1,002 days by Luis Antonio Carrera Almoina, a member of an elite Venezuelan family who remains at large and whose whereabouts are unknown. She was not his only victim. Another victim, Sulaima Jamali, soon came forward. Many years passed before she could overcome her fear of what she had gone through and the monster's threats. Even during her testimony, she spoke of other women known to have been his victims as well. Experts say that unfortunate events like the ones Linda experienced are not healed by time. Survivors learn to live with the pain, which is why the search for justice is so important. Only in this way can they be compensated for the horror they suffered and continue to live their lives. Linda repeatedly stresses how young she was at the time, as though trying to convince everyone that she was far too young for what happened to her. She answers every question with the gaze of someone who does not want to forget what happened. What really matters to her, more than 20 years later, is that she is still not giving up her fight and continues it with the same determination. Linda seeks justice and does so for all women who have been victims of any form of violence. Through her fight, she wants to ensure that no one else ever ends up in the same hell she did. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.